Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. In this podcast, your host, Lori Amin, will interview published authors to chat about their work, journey to getting published, and their book recommendations. If you share a passion for books and always looking for your next read, then join us. Hi, Jenny. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, Laura. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here. So tell us who you are and what do you do?
Who am I? My name is Jenny Lee, and I am the author of a young adult novel called Anna K. But the sequel of Anna K is coming out on April 27th, which is why we're talking. So it's very exciting. So I guess I am an author, and I'm also a TV writer-producer.
I love this. And I feel like your books can speak to TV. Like, I feel like I was just watching like an addictive show, just getting immersed in it. So I feel like that your TV writing does inform your books, you know?
Yes.
So when did you decide you want to become an author? Like, just to write your own novel?
I have always been one of those kids who, loved to read and wanted to write. I really knew at a really young age. I remember like always writing like short stories. I went through a huge Stephen King phase in like fourth grade. And I remember writing a short story about a scavenger hunt that were like one by one from camp, like kids were dying, just disappearing basically. And I was like so proud of like my darkness, like everybody died except the one person who won the scavenger hunt in the end. And then I just have always been doing, even before that for Halloween, a lot of people might not know this, but back in the day when you were learning cursive in school, there was this paper with like a little dotted line so you could work on your penmanship. Mm-hmm. So when I was using that paper, I wrote like my very first story about a little kitten that lived in a Halloween pumpkin, basically. I remember that sort of thing. So it was just always present that I wanted to be a writer, even though my parents wanted me to be a lawyer.
It's okay. It is okay. I think our parents always wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor. I feel like guys, you know, I ended up going through a different route. It was like, I'm going to law school. I was like, oh, I don't want to take the LSATs. I'll go to take the GREs. I'll go to grad school instead, like just do, try to do something else. So it is okay. So let's talk about your YA journey. Okay. By Anna Karenina, set in New York City, for Gen Zs, YA, as opposed to retelling like literary fiction or any other genre,
I have always loved the book Anna Karenina. I read it in high school when I was like 15 years old. I read it in my 20s. I read it in my 30s. But in 2012, I was in New York City for Christmas with my mother, and we saw the movie, the Keira Knightley version of the movie together at the Ziegfeld Theater. And we got into this big discussion. My mom's actually had read, Anna Karenina, the original as well. And we were discussing about like, it's just so tragic. Her fate is so terrible in the book. Obviously it's like the famous, train scene, but like before that, she just spirals. She becomes a morphine addict. She gets really jealous. She gets really paranoid. She's just so miserable and unhappy. And it's just like, she really had no other choice as a woman in society, in Russian society in that time in the late 1800s. Like once she made that first mistake of like, getting busted, sleeping, outside of her marriage or having a love affair. Mm-hmm. So after I watched the movie, I was talking to my mom and I was like, it really is a story about first time you've ever fallen in love, because in the original novel, she is married and has a child, but she got married very young and women were kind of considered property basically then. Mm-hmm. So it's not the same thing. She didn't love her husband. And then when she meets Vronsky, it was just this like immediate love on both sides for them, which I've always found very romantic. It's not just one-sided on her side. He like, soon as he sees her, he's smitten. And so we were talking about it and I was like, if you did a modern day retelling, it would probably need to be teenagers because a lot of people have their first, dalliance or experiences with love or what they think is love in high school. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It just, after we talked about it that night, I couldn't sleep. We're staying in a hotel because I live in Los Angeles. And then I went down to the lobby at like 3 a.m. and I was just thinking about it. And I was like, oh, it would be a great young adult novel. And also the train is so iconic because it's St. Petersburg and Moscow, the train. Mm-hmm. But I was like, oh my God, New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut with Metro North would be perfect. And I was like, oh, rich kids in New York City. And it just all came together. I wrote an email to my agent that night in the middle of the night and was like, hey, what do you think about this idea? And she wrote me back like the next day and was like, it's an amazing idea. You need to write it immediately. And then I waited 5 years.
It's okay. It came at the perfect time because I feel like it's like a perfect, pandemic reading because it came out on debut in March, in the middle of the
March 3rd, right before the week before. Yes.
The week before the pandemic. And it just like, it felt like this like Gossip Girl updated, like not problematic, because Gossip Girl is problematic. Like this is not problematic. Rich kids behaving badly, just kind of like addictive. Like you can't stop reading and you can't stop figuring it out. And then the ending is so tragic and you're just like, what is going on? Like,
right.
And I listened to it, by the way. So
did you?
I was reading it and listening to it, and I have to tell you, the audiobook is just a spectacular because it just like gets you going. You're like, what is going on? What is going on? It's like snippet and so good.
Jenna Ushkowitz is doing the audiobook for the sequel. She just finished recording it, so I'm very excited because I thought she did such a great job. Yeah, totally.
I'm gonna pre-order it. Yeah. I read it and I was like, I need to listen to this. Like this is like, so the audiobook kept me at night. Like that's my nighttime reading.
Right.
So it was just like this fun experience of being transported to New York. And I lived in New York for 14 years. And so I moved just before the pandemic. So I'm like, it's familiar with the sightseeing. I'm familiar with the rich kids behaving badly because I had been experienced with those. And so it was fun to see all this like pop culture, reminders of like different things, like are so unique about New York that, for those who are dreaming to go to New York, like just read Anna K and then get, and then I can't wait. You get LA, you get Seoul, Right. So let's chat about the rich kids behaving badly. What was your research process like?
What was my research process? Well, I was not a rich kid growing up at all. I mean, my father was a doctor. I grew up in Tennessee, actually. And so I always lived in small towns. So when I went to NYU for college, I was 18 when I arrived in New York. And I was just blown away by like the size and the sheer scope and then the amount of people. And I really was also very fascinated by the amount of money that's like in New York City. Like I was poor and living in New York all through my 20s, but it was super fun then. I didn't care because it was like just so much to do and see. But you always, there was always an ever-present thing of like incredibly rich people like running around New York City. You just can't. The same thing with Los Angeles here. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. A little bit of my research I went to 1 year of boarding school as a freshman, and I went to a school called St. George's in Newport, Rhode Island. That's a boarding school. And one of my freshman year roommate was a Johnson & Johnson from Johnson & Johnson. Yes. So they were, and there was another girl at the school and they were, in freshman year, they were like, oh, she's going to be going to Yale because her parents donated like a library. You know what I mean? It was just a very wealthy crowd. And here's what I learned from it. My roommate, who I, became friends with that year, we're not in touch anymore. I like went home with her for spring break to this crazy mansion. And it was just such a weird world. But what I can say, it's like, there are fancy cars and there's nannies. I never saw the parents around. I got lost in the house. There's wine cellars. You see this huge scope. But I mean, honestly, between my relationship with her, we were still teenage girls. We talked about boys. We talked about breaking out. We talked about our clothes and our lives. Like, here's the thing. If you're a rich kid and you're born into money, because I know rich people aren't that popular right now, but like these kids were just born into it. It's not really their fault. I mean, maybe their parents did bad things to get them that rich, but it's not really affecting them. And they're still teenagers anyway. It's just like sort of a fun background setting.
Yeah, it's a fun background setting. Like, honestly, like the money, yes, they're entitled and yes, but I feel like it's also generation too. Like, like and it's just basically also being a teenager. Like you feel like you know it all and you have the way of the world and like you're invisible. Like you're not supposed to, like nothing's supposed to face you. Like, and you're supposed to behave badly. Like, part of it. Like,
exactly.
Like you're just experimenting, like you're supposed to like go out, like have fun, like life is fun, or like how does summertime fun time, have a party because we're bored. Like
the summertime fun time party. Yes, I actually took that because my now husband, when we first met in 2014, he was living in Brooklyn and I was living in Los Angeles, and we met on a book tour outside of Chicago. I went for a month to go. I just rented a big sublet in New York City, and we like just totally had this great time for a month. But we had a summertime fun time party, and we're like, we should have a party because we have this big space and whatnot, and to just meet all our friends, get all our friends together. And we just named it a summertime fun time party. So that's why Stephen has a summertime fun time party.
I love it. I love the excuse for a party.
Yes.
I love the excuse for a party. I love, Via's like takeaway when she went to the stylist internship interview, and she's like, "Why do you pick this outfit?" And she's like, "I can tell you the lie, but I can tell you the truth. It was picked
right."
Like it was like fun. Like it's like okay, like you get to see them like. They want to live this Instagram influencer life, but then the reality is that it's all handed down to them, or they figure it out.
Yeah. What you're one of the first people I've talked to who's read the sequel, besides everyone at Flatiron, etc., and my agent. So tell me, what'd you think? I
loved it. I actually I was enthralled. I was so mad. I was like, I wish I had the audiobook so I can listen to it too. But I have to tell you, I love the whole soul, the whole K-pop. The K-pop Academy. I'm fascinated by K-pop. And so Quentin, just the whole, how to be famous and the tragic love story about him too.
Right.
It was just it just added this sense of heightened emotion. I think you only see it you see in YA a lot. You see this is it's all or nothing.
Right. Yes.
You must have to. And so I really loved it. I love that Vronsky still play a role.
Right. Good.
We know his ending.
Right.
So I feel like you just brought closure, and I absolutely love the epilogue. I was like, oh my God.
Good. I'm really happy to hear that, because I have to tell you, that book was a struggle during the pandemic. I mean, it was almost halfway, probably almost 3/4 written by the time the first book came out, which was March 3rd, a year ago. I had already started writing the sequel. But then when the pandemic hit, I just stopped on the book totally for 2 or 3 months, because we were like, what's happening? What's going to happen? Are people going to want to read this? What do I do? I just took a pause. And then the pandemic was so scary and depressing and sad that I mean, I had one of the best writing experiences ever for Anna K, the first book. And then I had one of the worst ones trying to write the sequel. I just really struggled. And in the beginning, I will say my editors they cut out a lot of Anna K. They're like, she's too sad. She's too sad. She's too sad over, in the very beginning of the book. So that's why she's not she's not in it that much. They're like, she needs something else. She can't just be mopey the whole time. And I'm like, yeah, but it happened right after the last book. She would be sad. So it was it was tough, but I actually, it's funny. The paperback comes out at the end of March, March 23rd, I believe, the paperback for the first one. And there's a bonus chapter in there from Anna K, the sequel, but it's actually wrong. I ended up rewriting that first chapter. The chapter I think you read probably is the right one, but in the paperback, they didn't have time to switch it out, because I really wanted to, I don't know, just change the tone a little bit of the first one. So I was like, oh, it'll be a fun bonus episode to see what the original first chapter was. It's a little bit different. It didn't have the whole lolly thing and screaming, the primal scream. So.
I love the primal scream. I feel like that was it just added a new touch, because I think it's something interesting. Anna experiences grief. I experienced grief of a loss of a loved one.
Right.
And yet she has to experience it in a way from being a rich kid, who is also experiencing a teenager. So she's like, I'm going to party. I'm going to I'm going to go and be sent to the Masked Singer, which by the way, I love the homage to the Masked Singer.
Right.
So, I was like, oh, it's a Korean show.
It was a Korean show first.
So I love the fact that she was her dad was like, well, we're going to take you, and so you can see if you can study abroad, and so you can have a fresh start. And it's so out of this world, but at the same time, that's when you're struggling with grief. You're just I want a fresh start. I want to be away from it.
Yeah, totally.
Via being in denial is another way. You experience grief in a different ways as a teenager,
right?
Not as as an adult. You probably as an adult, your expectations are a little different,
right?
I don't know. For the listeners, for just tuning in, I feel like you just need to pick this book up immediately.
Immediately.
So speaking of the pandemic, how you mentioned you struggle writing this book. Is there anything self-care that you took care or you took away from this past year that you're self-care?
So in the 4th of July weekend, I think, I mean, so what, we were like
3 months,
4 months in, or, to the pandemic, and everyone was going a little bit crazy. And I was just so, I live in an apartment in Los Angeles, and so we don't have any outdoor space. Mm-hmm. And so I was just like going a little bit stir crazy. And I am not an outdoorsy person. I call myself indoorsy, basically. I'm like, I'm indoorsy. I don't really do hiking or go camping, etc. But I was like desperate. And I was like, I would go camping. We just can go somewhere. Like, let's go to, drive out into the desert and whatnot. And my husband's like, no, we can't just do something that we've never really done before. We don't know how to hike or whatnot. So he was like, why don't we go camping inside? So we built a fort in our living room. We called it the Fort of July, basically, with like sheets, and like we pushed we have this day bed that we pushed up against our couch. So it's like, well, I'm too old to like sit on the floor. So we were like, we needed a cushion. So we built it above it, like a little, like an old school fort with like our chairs. And then like there was a Swiffer mop, and we used all these different things, and it was tented over with like a duvet cover. And we like rented like a scary podcast. And then we like stayed in there, and we had, we just kind of like hung out in like a pretend tent as if, and it was super fun. We had like ended up having like a really good weekend. So then we decided to like upgrade our fort, and we bought like real supplies. Like I bought like a set of super cheap sheets online, and we cut them open, the duvet, so we had it big enough. And we erected what is known as the emotional support fort. So it was like this little place in the middle of our living room where if you're in the fort, you don't read the news, you don't read bad news, you can go in there and read, you can put the flap down so you're all enclosed. We put lanterns and twinkly lights in there. It's like this little oasis. And I have to say, I really feel like it saved our sanity a little bit, because we just like, you just needed a place to escape to. And our big rule was like, no news, don't bring any news in there. This is like a fun, like safe space to like go and run away to. So that is my recommendation.
I love this idea of creating an emotion support fort.
Yeah. Yes.
Indoor. Like you can actually have AC if you want.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And our giant dog, I have a 135-pound Newfoundland like Anna, but I only have one. She's not allowed on furniture, but then we're like, okay, but she has special fort rules. She's allowed in the fort. So that's always fun. So she would climb up. She gets stressed because she knows she's not supposed to be on furniture. And so she'll like climb in for like 5 minutes and then she'll leave. But it's like super fun when she does.
Oh, yeah. I saw that you had Newfoundlands. Yeah. It's a dog. So I love the homage.
Yes.
So what are you working next?
What am I working on now? Right now, since I am, not saying that book writing is my side hustle, but it's a little bit my side hustle. I'm predominantly a TV writer and producer. So I have a project that's, a kid's thing for 12-year-olds. I can't really tell the title yet, but it's not at HBO Max that I'm about to start a mini room on about teen girls. And so that I'm working on. I'm working on a screenplay right now that was commissioned, like a rom-com. In terms of book, though, we just finished edits on Anna K. I was working up until the very end, like I'm doing rewrites and stuff, up till, January or February, basically, of last look. So what do you think? Yeah, I'm taking a break, but what do you think? I'm debating obviously a book 3 for her senior year.
I think that would be amazing because isn't she going with Lolly to Spence?
Yes, she's going to go to Lolly. So I feel like her, Lolly, and Beatrice should like run New York City. It would be really fun.
Yes, that would be like the power trio. I feel like we can see them like just going to see senior year, because senior year is like a big year of stuff. Although I feel bad for Steven getting his senior year in 2020.
I know. But
he didn't go to graduation, so it doesn't matter.
Well, technically, it's funny because I was thinking about that too. The book is dated. They haven't hit the pandemic yet, because that's the summer of 2019. So I don't know what's going to happen, because that's the whole thing now. If I do continue in real time, they should technically be going through the pandemic. So I don't know yet what's going to happen.
Honestly, you can suspend belief, and like we don't need to read about the pandemic. Like
I know, because we're living it. I know, I agree. Actually, yes,
like
for sure.
it would be nice to imagine a world where we didn't have a pandemic and we were just like going to Soul Cycle classes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And like going shopping and like having interactions and having long hogs.
Right.
I read quite a few books have been written in the pandemic, and like we're just spending like a couple pages hugging each other.
Right.
You know? So.
Right. I agree. Because all those movies about the pandemic that came out in the middle of the pandemic, I haven't liked any. I mean, I don't want to watch it. I'm like living it. So I'm like, I don't want to see it. I want escapism right now, which is, why I think Anna K is a good read right now, because to me it is like frothy. I wanted it to be frothy, soapy fun, like as much as it is, a tragedy. I didn't want it to be like of the level. I mean, we already have that book. I mean, we have the original, which is very, heady and is literature and high art. But this Anna K is not. It's like supposed to be fun and soapy and like quick read.
It is soapy, it's fun, it's frothy, it's just bubbly, it's sparkling. Like it just feels like, you just want to keep reading them. So I say, like, if you feel the call to write a book 3, I'll buy it.
Okay, good.
And I'll be like, okay, tell me what Anna's doing, and then take her to college.
Yeah. Good to know.
Like I want her to have a happy ending.
Yes.
So just keep going.
All right. I hear you. I agree.
Awesome. Have you read any books that you recommend?
It's funny. I was reading, since you sent me, thank you very much for sending me your questions ahead of time. And I was thinking about that right before our call started, like what books my reading habits have changed a little bit, because usually when I am deep in writing a book, I'm not really reading that much. Yeah. I'm certainly not reading in the same genre. I'm reading a little bit of nonfiction here or there. But in terms of the books that I've been reading that like Lily King's Writers and Artists, really, I loved. I did that, what you said, which is like, I read the book, but then I got the audiobook, and then I listened to it on the treadmill, because we don't ever walk around. So we got a treadmill as soon as the pandemic started. So I try to like I don't even run. I try to like just walk. And that's when I've been listening to audiobooks. The other book though, I read Anxious People by Frederick Bachman for Book of the Month Club, because they wanted me to do a recommendation of it. And then I was like, okay, because it's so I started reading it, and I hadn't read A Man Called Ove, even though I know it's so popular. And when I first started it, I wasn't sure, but I was reading it on the treadmill like every day. And so then as I got on, it just like slowly pulled me in, and I really it was a very emotional ending. He really, because it's kind of quirky and funny and a little bit random, and then slowly though it all like comes together and just gets very layered. And I got a little bit choked up reading it on the treadmill at the end of the thing. I was like it kind of came out of nowhere for me, and I was like, oh, I found it very moving.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love these recommendations. I love the fact that like you're multitasking when you're reading.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's important. Like people assume like, I'm just going to spend all this time reading all these books. And just like reality is that we're reading, we're listening, books, we're making chores, like we're just getting our reading done when we can.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. I read Daisy Jones and the Six in November, and I know I'm a year late to it because everybody was reading it that I knew, and everybody loved it. And I finally was like, okay, I went on vacation to Palm Springs. It's like the first getaway that we did since the pandemic started, my husband and I, and we for our anniversary, and we go, and I was like, I just need that book that's gonna like transport me. And it was like, it was great. I loved it.
I think Daisy Jones is a good similarity to your book. It's like it's a short chapters or like all oral history. Like it's like it's a sense of like you're moving along with the different characters.
Totally.
You're not sitting still with just one character all the time. You're like jumping around. So I love this. So tell us where you can find you online.
I am on Instagram only right now. I mean, I do have a Twitter account, but I'm never on it. So it's at Jenny Lee Writes, and I'm trying to be better at it. I was pretty good all of last year, but then I just kind of needed a break from like news and media. So I hadn't been on my phone as much since January, since this new year started. But I'm like gearing up again for the release of Anna K Away. So I am on Instagram.
Thank you, Jenny, for being on the show.
No, thank you for having me. It's been super fun to talk to you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. For book recommendations, author interview archives, and other fun book resources and tips, please visit whatchrenextblog.com. The Watch Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Network. To discover new shows to listen and love, please visit frolic.media/podcast. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.